Good afternoon, everybody. This is Joe Lucey with this week's Market Huddle on December 14th. Imagine here for just a second, you are turning 72 in 2021. Now, you may not think of 72 as necessarily that great a milestone, but 72 is the year that we now are required to start taking out required minimum distributions. Now, what's an RMD? An RMD, a required minimum distribution, is when the IRS forces us to start to withdraw money from our IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, and all these other tax-deferred retirement accounts. Now, if we're not careful, this can trigger a series of potential problems. Today's Market Huddle, what I'd like to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about four of these hurdles, four of these potential problems that we have, and what you may want to consider as far as making sure that you're planning around them. So with that said, I'm going to start up my PowerPoint here, and away we go. Most of you that have been joining us here for these Market Huddles know that we've had this disclaimer here. The disclaimer basically says that I am not a tax preparer. I do tax planning as a certified financial planner. We help families reduce their taxes, but it's a strategic planning. We don't interpret tax code. So nothing we do here today should be construed as any kind of interpretation of the tax code. We also are not attorney, so if we get into anything, which I don't think we will today, around estate planning or legal documentation and what have you, that's not what we do either. But we are certified financial planners, and we believe in a process that we call the Tax Smart Retirement Planning process, that we help families, literally thousands of families, going into and through retirement, and how we do that. And one of the biggest areas that we tend to focus on is tax planning, how to help you legally, morally, ethically reduce taxes in your retirement journey. So let's start off, before we actually get into the threats, let's start by talking about the ABCs of RMDs. What do you need to know about a required distribution? Keep in mind, contributing money is always been easy into these plans. You start to stash away money from your paychecks. You sacrifice a certain amount of the money that's coming in that could be used for new vehicles, family trips, and what have you. You set it aside into a plan. For many of us, those plans had a component that was matched by employers. This money, you got a tax deduction when the money went in. It's now growing, compounding, and I hear it over and over and over again. How surprised so many families are with the amount of money that they've been able to stash away in these accounts. Now, with that said, the promise, the way that this program worked, this retirement account, when they started to establish it, we were told we could get a deduction when we put the money in. We were told that we wouldn't have to pay tax on it until we took it out. And at the time, we were told that if we didn't start take the money out by 70 and a half, we'd have to start taking it out and paying tax on it. Well, recently, with the Secure Act, they raised that to 72. So the Secure Act, which was passed on December of 2019, as we were going into this this year of 2020 here, Congress passed the setting up every community for retirement. It's and basically one of the things that came out of that was pushing the required minimum distribution age from 70 and a half to 72. So 2020 was going to be an interesting year where some families would be forced to take it under the old rules. Some would be forced to take it under the new rules. But instead, of course, coronavirus came through. Starting in February, all of a sudden we had a situation where Congress started passing some rules and laws to help retirees, and one of those was what was called the CARES Act. Now, the CARES Act, or the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which was passed in March, basically what that ended up doing is telling us that we did not have to take a required distribution in 2020. So nobody that's joining us here on today's presentation has an RMD in 2020. Even if it's an inherited account, you don't have to take that. But Starting again 2021, unless there's an act of Congress, we will have to start taking out RMDs. So that's going to impact anybody that is 72 anytime in the year of 2021 or older. So how does it work? Well, basically, when we turn 72, the IRS is going to look at our account balance as of December 31st, the year before. In other words, December 31st, in about 2 weeks here, they're going to look at our retirement accounts. They're then going to have us divide that by our actuarial life expectancy. I don't want to get too much into the weeds here on this. We are more than happy to show you what that life expectancy is and how the calculation is done when we review your accounts with you. However, just understand it starts at about 3.65%. It grows to about 4% in a couple years. So by the time you're 75 or 76, you're taking out 4%. By the time you're 80, you've got to take out 5%. And by the time you're 90, you're taking out 10% of the account balance. So the amount of money that has to come out grows as you age. And keep in mind, and if you've ever listened to us on Secure Retirement Radio, I talk about this lie that I believe is the largest lie that's been perpetrated across baby boomers. We were all told the same thing. We were going to defer our money into these accounts, and then this money was going to grow tax deferred, which has been a good thing. Most of us are looking at our balances and we're pleased. The problem is we were told that when we take this money out, we'd be at a lower bracket than when we put it in. And many millions, tens of thousands of boomers each day are waking up and realizing that this may not be the case. So on to threat number one. Required minimum distributions. They actually can end up triggering higher tax bills than what you were expecting. I encourage you, whether you're a current client of ours or if you are a somebody that's just maybe been listening to these and would like some additional information, let's sit down, let's show you how these work if we haven't already done so. Because we have to recognize one thing. We all have these IRAs and these retirement accounts, and we think of this money as ours for our use in retirement. But I want you to start thinking of these as joint accounts. They're an account between you and the IRS or Uncle Sam. Now, unfortunately, you can end up paying a whole lot more taxes on these accounts than you even know. Now, the good news is that there are some simple tax planning strategies that we can often use with you to make sure that we reduce taxes. The first step is to recognize that there may be a problem. Threat number one, required minimum distributions. They can end up pushing our tax rates up. What do I mean by this? Well, what happens is we let this money grow because we were always told don't ever touch it. So we retire at 65. We don't touch the money. We let it continue to compound. At age 72, we're forced to take out 4%. First thing we need to do is calculate what that would be for you. If you've got a if you're currently 62 years old and you've got, just using a hypothetical number, $1 million in your retirement account, that money is very likely going to grow if it's left untouched. Maybe it would even double. So your million turns into 2. Now, if I've got to take out 4% of $2 million, that's $80,000 a year. The first question we should ask ourselves is, would I take that money out if I wasn't required by law? All too often, probably about 70% of the time, we find families that are transitioning to retirement and either A, they're required to take out more than they would do, or in many cases, they're required to take out money that they would have never had to touch in the first place. And what happens is that this money that comes out of our IRAs, every penny of it has to be taxed. It's going to be taxed by us. It'll be taxed by our surviving spouse if we pass it on to them at a higher rate than us. That's called the widow's penalty, and it'll be passed on to the kids someday, and every penny of these IRAs, retirement accounts, has to be taxed. So how does it work? We end up taking this money out. We pay tax on it, and this tax can trigger additional expenses. Number one, it can cause us to start paying taxes on Social Security. Social Security by itself is completely tax-free. It's only when other things such as maybe required distributions come into play that we start to pay tax. It could be other factors, rental income, pensions, things like that. But the biggest culprit we see are usually your retirement accounts. Number two, it can push you into a higher marginal bracket. Maybe you'd already be retiring and you'd be comfortable in the 12% bracket or 22. All of a sudden now these required distributions, the extra money that is forced to come out can push you into a higher bracket. It can cause you additional taxes around investments. All of a sudden, now you would have been able to sell a mutual fund with a capital gain tax-free, but instead you're going to be paying tax on the capital gain, or maybe it's the real estate property that gets sold or what have you. You can pay hidden taxes, phantom taxes, taxes around things like your Medicare premiums. We talk about this just about every week on here, but all of a sudden, Medicare now has a means test. Those families with higher incomes start to pay tax on Medicare premiums. It's additional premiums. It's not really a tax, but let's call it what it is. If you're forced to pay more premiums for the exact same health insurance coverage as your neighbor because you've got too much taxable income, that's a tax. So RMDs can end up triggering, and it can become an absolute avalanche unless we start to do some planning. Most people don't realize it, but taxes are lower now, which brings us to our next threat, that taxes are projected to go higher as we go on. Taxes are lower now than they've been in 40 years. In fact, I often argue with somebody that they're lower now than they've probably ever been. And the reason why is because we now have higher higher deductibles. The 12% tax bracket today is lower than the 15 that we had a few years ago. In fact, just in 2018, if I had an income above about $80,000, I would be paying tax at 25%. Today, I can actually have an income that exceeds $350,000 and only pay 24% tax. Today, taxes are on sale. The codes that the taxes that were passed here a few years ago are the most generous we've seen, and this goes back to before World War II. But the potential problem is this. Number one, we're at 40-year lows. We've thrown $3 trillion of additional stimulus on there. And the president-elect actually ran under the premise that he was going to raise taxes. So for us to not think that taxes are very likely going to start going higher and do nothing while we have a short opportunity here may be a problem. So we want to make sure that we're addressing the second biggest threat. Tax rates are going higher. You know, keep in mind, CPAs, attorneys, accountants, and economists, they rarely agree on any one thing, but I think that everybody agrees on one thing. Tax rates are going to be going higher. Now, CNBC tells us that the wealthy should be prepping for these tax increases. I think the mass affluent, those of us that are listening to this presentation here today, to today's Market Huddle, we need to be starting to look at this too. We've already seen it. I mean, history has said that all of a sudden they're going to start hiding taxes. They're going to make us pay extra Medicare premiums. Maybe we'll be paying more Social Security premiums. Maybe they're actually going to raise the amount of Social Security that gets taxed from 85% up to 100% of the income. There's a lot of different ways that they can finesse these taxes, or that we can end up paying extra premiums or something for Medicare that are hidden taxes. To try to pay down some of the threats around these rising taxes. And if Congress does absolutely nothing at all, if they do nothing at all, January 1st of 2026, as taxes are already scheduled to go higher. Sometimes families aren't aware of that, but when they passed the laws that brought in the newest tax rates, they set it up so that there would be a sunset provision, which is December 31st of 2025. So what has to happen for taxes to go up? Absolutely nothing. Congress can continue to operate the way that they tend to do it with the divided House and Senate. It's very likely that that's going to be the case. And all of a sudden, we don't do anything, and come January 1st of 2026, we find ourselves in a bracket that could be anywhere from 20 to 40% higher than we currently are. We need to start looking at the second threat starting to plan in our retirement planning that taxes are going to go higher. And we want to do that here at Secure Retirement Financial. We want to show you how you can do that. Now, if you're an existing client of ours, let's schedule a review. Let's make sure that we're doing everything we should possibly be doing between now and a couple weeks from now when the year 2020 expires to set ourselves up for 2021. If you're not a client of ours, in a moment here, we're going to give everybody an opportunity to schedule a one-on-one consultation. It's a short phone call with one of the team members here so that we can identify the number one thing you can do right now before the end of this year to put yourself in a better situation around these 4 threats. Keep in mind, the first threat, taxes or required distributions can oftentimes increase your taxes artificially. You can be pushed into a higher bracket. Number 2, we know that the money that comes out of these accounts is probably, very likely, with a lot of stimulus, going to be taxed at higher rates down the road. And our third threat here this morning, required distributions can force you to end up locking in investment losses in a down market. Let's talk about earlier this year for just a moment. January looked like 2020 was going to be a banner year. Everybody was excited. Unemployment rates were really low. There was a lot of really, really good things going on in the economy. And then all of a sudden we started hearing this rumbling of this virus going on in China. And the next thing you knew, we had a situation where off in Italy, they were at max capacity in their hospital beds, and we were worried that that was going to come here. Remember, they sent the 2 ships, one out to San Francisco, or was it New York, Los Angeles, one to the East Coast, and then one to New York, and then one to the West Coast there. And all of a sudden, the market started acting really goofy. And in a very short period of time, just 22 days, a little bit more than 3 weeks, the stock market was down 36%. The stock market lost a third of its value in just 22 days, less than a month. And next thing you know, people were sitting there forcing to have to take money out of their accounts to depend for their expenses. We talk a lot on Secure Retirement Radio and with the planning we do about making sure that we always have enough mailbox income, money that hits the checkbook, regardless of what's going on Wall Street. And there's a couple reasons why we talk about that. Number 1, emotionally, we know that families do much better when they have the income they need, when it just automatically shows up in the checkbook and we don't have to worry about taking withdrawals out of the stock market when it's acting goofy. But maybe the more important thing is that when the markets start to go down like we saw earlier this year, families that are forced to take out required distributions are locking in losses at lows. They can't allow the money to recover. We actually saw this a couple years ago in 2018 when we saw the stock market pull back 20%. A lot of times families wait until the very end of the year to take the required distributions. We usually don't recommend it. We usually recommend that we put something more systematic. Let's take it out periodically throughout the year. Or even just take it right away because it just get it over and done with if you got to take it, But with that said, all of a sudden, come December of 2 years ago, families were forced to take that RMD. They didn't have the CARES Act in 2018. You still had to take it regardless of the markets going down. So you want to make sure that you put a plan in place. You want to make sure that you're educated. You want to know how to make sure that we can protect ourselves from these 3 threats. And we want to be a resource here at Secured Retirement Financial. So let's talk about the third threat. And this one here, as we talk about the 4 ways that required distributions can threaten your financial security in retirement. This one here is the granddaddy of them all. It's the one thing that we all need to be keeping a look at and keeping on our radar, especially if you are between the ages of 60 and 70. If you are between the age of 60 and 70, you are in what I call the golden decade. It's that period of time when so many different things around retirement start to come to fruition. You've worked 30, 40 years, maybe longer. Now you're ready to retire. 70 is, at 60, 59 and a half, that's when you can start to take your money out of most of retirement accounts without that 10% penalty. And I always called it the golden decade because at age 70 is when we were forced to take it out again. And we talked about that earlier. 72 is now the new age. But it's this 10-year period of time that we absolutely have to protect us from the number one risk that retirees have, and that is a sequence of returns risk. And when we combine that with required minimum distributions, it can be absolutely lethal. What is sequence of returns risk? It's the risk of entering into retirement into a downturn. Now, this downturn can be short-term like we had here in the spring where it recovers fairly quickly and then you end up being forced to make mistakes. Or worse, imagine somebody that retired here in 2000 and was forced to take money out in 2000, 2001, 2002 when the markets lost 50%. And then a few years later, just as they had locked in all those losses but started to see their recoveries and maybe they were starting to feel like they were going to get back to where they were, all of a sudden 2008 hit and they had to do it again. You have to be sure that we are protecting ourselves from sequence of returns risk. The best way to do that is to always have a place that I can take money that I don't have to worry about what's going on in Wall Street. It's about taking money from accounts that don't have what's called market value adjustments. And it's the difference between having a retirement plan that'll last decades or retirement plans that can fall short way too early in your retirement. There's nothing worse than being 80, 85 years old, chock full of life, and out of money. And the only way to really protect yourself is to understand that the investment returns that we get have to be separated from what we've been talking about here today. How do I take my money back? How do I make it last a lifetime? How do I do so tax efficiently? And that's what we want to make sure that we're here to help you with, because those retirement accounts you have, you've got they're a joint account between you and somebody else. Every penny of them has to be taxed. It's going to be taxed by you and your spouse if you're married each and every year once you turn 72 or as you take the money out. If one of you passes on, the surviving spouse will get taxed at higher rates, that widow's penalty. When it passes on to the kiddos, they get to pay kiddos rates. Everybody gets penalized here, but every penny gets taken out. And the absolute worst thing that can happen is you're forced to pay tax on this money that you otherwise didn't need. And that's what we want to help you with. So if you're a current client of ours, please, and we have not scheduled a time to review things, let's sit down, let's talk here between now and the next couple of weeks, make sure we got all of our ducks in a row, make sure we've dotted our I's, crossed our T's, and that you are setting yourselves up for what I think is going to be a great year. I think 2021 is really going to prove to be a huge opportunity. I really do think, and I've said this more recently, that 2020 is really an opportunity year. It's a year that we can put ourselves in the best position going forward, but to do so, we got to take action. So give us a call. Let's show you how we can make sure that we make a lemonade out of the lemons that we've been given in 2020. What are those one or two things that you can do to make a significant difference in your retirement planning between now and the end of the year? If you're not this is available to everybody. So how do you do that? Well, I'm going to show you here. All you got to do is you got to click on the the tab there, and it'll automatically bring it to a calendar. We'll get you in front of one of our team members here. Let's spend 15 to 25 minutes or so just identifying what it is that we can be doing. We want to be a resource. We want to make 2020 an opportunity year, and we're really looking forward to getting into 2021 and really taking advantage of this. Best way to do that is to make sure that we're always looking at the 4 ways that these required distributions can threaten your financial security and plan around them. That's all I have for this week. If there's any quick questions, I'll answer something here. I don't see any right now. You know what? Everybody have a great week. We are going to be off next week. There will not be a Monday Huddle next week. Because of the holidays. We'll probably have another one here on January 4th. So we're going to take 2 weeks off here between now and the end of the year. So this is the last opportunity here to get on the calendars before the end of the year so we can plan around it. Schedule your complimentary review, schedule an opportunity to sit down. Let's find the number one step you should be taking. And then I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday. I know that some of you are currently celebrating Hanukkah. I hope you're having a great Hanukkah. Have a great Christmas. Happy New Year, and we'll see everybody on January 4th. Have a great day.